In 2013, two cavers were squeezing through a gap so narrow they had to exhale just to fit through it. It's called Superman's crawl. You go in with one arm stretched out in front of you like you're flying because there's no other way your shoulders fit. After that, they drop down a nearly vertical chute, 40 feet straight down, barely wider than a human body. At the bottom, in a chamber that had probably not seen a living person in tens of thousands of years, they found bones. Not a few, not scattered, hundreds of them, belonging to a creature nobody had ever seen before. And here's the part that broke everything scientists thought they understood. This creature had a brain about the size of an orange, smaller than a chimpanzee's. And yet, somehow, its bones were down there on purpose. Not washed in by a flood, not dragged in by a predator. Placed there, again and again, over what looks like generations. If that's true, it means a creature we assumed was too simple, too animal, too not human enough, was carrying its dead through pitch-black tunnels, on purpose, possibly as some kind of ritual. That single discovery cracked open one of the most confident assumptions in all of science. That big brains are what make us human. That ritual, meaning, maybe even grief, all of that supposedly required a brain like ours. Turns out we might have been wrong. And this isn't the only time. Because the deeper scientists dig into our past, the messier the story gets. We didn't evolve in a straight line, from ape-like creature to caveman to us. Each one a little smarter than the last, like some kind of poster you'd see in a school hallway. That poster is basically fiction. The real story is stranger, and honestly, a lot more unsettling. There were other humans, plural, different species, walking the same earth as us, sometimes at the very same time. Some were shorter than a modern 10-year-old. One was so mysterious, we only know it existed because of a single finger bone. And every single one of these discoveries forced scientists to throw out what they thought they knew and start over. Today we're going through the discoveries that rewrote human history. The ones that proved we're not the neat, obvious endpoint of evolution we like to imagine. With the last one standing. Not because we were destined to be, because everyone else, for one reason or another, isn't here anymore. Let's get into it. Let's start with maybe the strangest one. In 2003, on a small Indonesian island called Flores, archaeologists dug up a skeleton that was barely 3.5 feet tall. Full-grown. Adult teeth, adult bone structure, but the size of a small child. At first, some scientists thought it had to be a diseased modern human, someone with a growth disorder, maybe dwarfism, maybe something else. That would have been the simple explanation, the comfortable one. But then they found more skeletons. Same size, same features. Multiple individuals spanning thousands of years. This wasn't one unlucky person with a medical condition. This was an entire population of small humans living on that island for tens of thousands of years, making stone tools, probably hunting animals far bigger than they were. Scientists ended up naming the species Homo floresiensis. Almost immediately, people started calling them hobbits because, well, what else are you supposed to call 3-foot-tall humans who apparently lived quiet, isolated lives on a remote island while the rest of the world had no idea they existed? The leading theory is something called island dwarfism. It's a real, documented pattern in evolution. When a species gets isolated on a small island with limited food and no major predators, over generations, individuals that use less energy tend to survive better. Being smaller means needing less food. Over enough generations, on a small enough island, an entire population can shrink. It's happened with elephants. It's happened with deer. And apparently, it happened with an entire branch of a human family tree. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you, though. The dating on some of those bones suggests these small humans might have still been alive as recently as 50,000 years ago. Which means for a while, a real, actual while, there were at least 2 different human species sharing the same planet. Us and them, possibly even in contact with each other, though nobody knows exactly what that contact looked like. Local legends on Flores, passed down for generations before any of this was discovered, describe small, hairy people living in caves on the island. Stories the islanders always treated as folklore. Nobody's proven a direct connection. But it's hard not to wonder whether some ancient memory of these small humans got baked into local storytelling long before science ever caught up. Either way, the hobbits of Flores broke one of the most basic assumptions people had. The human evolution was one clean line, ending with us. It's not a line. It's more like a tree with a lot of branches that got cut short. Now here's one that's even stranger, because we barely have any physical evidence for it at all. In 2008, in a cave in Siberia called Denisova Cave, researchers found a tiny fragment of a finger bone. Not a skull, not a full skeleton, a finger bone, and later a single tooth. When they extracted DNA from that finger bone, the results didn't match any known human species. Not us. Not Neanderthals. Something else entirely. A group of ancient humans that had never been identified before, that we still, to this day, have almost no physical remains for. Scientists named them the Denisovans, after the cave. And here's the thing that makes this genuinely wild. Even though we have almost nothing physical to study, just a few bone fragments and teeth, we know an enormous amount about them because of what they left behind in us. See, when scientists started comparing Denisovan DNA to modern human DNA, they found something surprising. Certain populations today, especially in places like Tibet and parts of Southeast Asia and Papua New Guinea, carry noticeable amounts of Denisovan DNA. In some populations, it's several percent of their entire genome. And it's not just leftover genetic noise, either. There's a specific gene inherited from Denisovans that helps people at extremely high altitudes survive with lower oxygen levels. Modern Tibetan populations living at elevations that would give most people altitude sickness carry this gene, passed down from interbreeding with Denisovans tens of thousands of years ago. In other words, an extinct human species that we only know from a finger bone is still, right now, helping people breathe on top of mountains. Think about that for a second. We used to imagine that different early human species barely interacted, if at all. Now we know they didn't just coexist. They had children together, multiple times in multiple places across thousands of years. Their genes didn't disappear. They just got absorbed into us, which raises an uncomfortable question. If Denisovans were similar enough to us that we could have children with them, similar enough that we'd want to, how different were they, really? And how much of what feels like us is actually leftover pieces of species we don't even have full skeletons for? For most of the last century, if you said the word Neanderthal, people pictured a dumb, hunched-over brute, grunting, dragging a club, barely smarter than an animal. That image is everywhere. Cartoons, insults, casual jokes about someone being such a Neanderthal. Almost none of it is accurate. The image mostly comes from one badly reconstructed skeleton found in France in 1908. The scientist studying it didn't realize the individual had severe arthritis, which distorted the posture. He built an entire reconstruction, hunched spine, dragging knuckles, low forehead, based on a skeleton that was already bent from disease. That flawed image got published, got copied into textbooks, and stuck in the public imagination for over 100 years. The real picture, based on decades of more careful research, looks almost nothing like that. Neanderthals had brains that were, on average, slightly larger than ours. They made complex tools. They controlled fire. They wore clothing made from animal hides, stitched together with bone needles. They buried their dead, sometimes with flowers or objects placed alongside the body, which strongly suggests some kind of ritual, some kind of meaning attached to death, not just disposal. And in caves in Spain, archaeologists found geometric patterns scratched into the rock, deliberately, in a location Neanderthals could only have reached by walking deep underground with fire for light. Cave art, made by Neanderthals, tens of thousands of years before modern humans supposedly invented symbolic art. Then there's the part that really changes the story. Neanderthals didn't just cross paths with early modern humans. They had children with them, repeatedly. Today, almost everyone with non-African ancestry carries somewhere between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA. Some of it affects things like immune response. Some of it's linked to hair and skin traits. Some of it, oddly, is linked to certain health risks we still deal with today. Neanderthals didn't go extinct in some clean, total sense. Part of them is still walking around inside us right now. So why did they disappear as a distinct species? Nobody has one clean answer. It was probably a mix of things: competition for resources, climate shifts, smaller population sizes making them more vulnerable, and slow absorption into modern human populations through interbreeding. It wasn't a war we won. It was something slower, messier, and honestly a lot sadder than the old story of smarter humans wiped out the dumb cavemen. They weren't dumb. They were just unlucky in ways that are still being pieced together. Let's go back to where we started, that narrow cave in South Africa and the small brain species called Homo naledi. Here's why this discovery hit so hard. For decades, the assumption in anthropology was simple. Big brains come first, then complex behavior follows. You need a large brain to plan, to understand death, to develop ritual or meaning. It was treated almost like a rule. Homo naledi broke that rule completely. Its brain was roughly a third the size of a modern human's. By the old logic, that should mean simple behavior. No planning, no ritual, definitely no understanding of death. But the bones weren't just lying in the cave randomly. Researchers found them deep in a chamber that requires an extremely difficult, dangerous route to reach, squeezing through gaps, climbing down a near-vertical chute in complete darkness. No natural way for bodies to end up there by accident. No sign of water damage or flood deposits that could explain it. The best explanation researchers have is that other members of this species carried the bodies down there deliberately, some kind of ancient version of a funeral. There's more. In parts of the cave, researchers found what looks like intentional markings on the walls, crosshatch patterns, carved with some kind of tool. If those markings really were made deliberately by Homo naledi, it would mean a small brain species was creating symbolic marks on cave walls, doing something we used to think required a brain like ours. Some scientists still debate exactly how deliberate all of this was. Science is supposed to argue this stuff out before settling on conclusions. That's how it's supposed to work. But even in the most cautious interpretation, the discovery forced a serious rethink. The old assumption, no big brain, no complex behavior, doesn't hold up cleanly anymore. Which means the qualities we like to think make us special, grief, ritual, meaning, the drive to honor our dead, might not be uniquely human traits that appeared once brains got big enough. They might be older than that, deeper than that, maybe even built into being human in a much broader sense than we assumed. So here's where it gets genuinely strange to sit with. For most of human history, and I mean the actual majority of the time humans have existed on this planet, we were not alone. Multiple human species existed side by side. Homo erectus, Neanderthals, Denisovans, the small-stature hobbits on Flores, Homo naledi, probably a few others we haven't even found evidence of yet. There was a period not that long ago in evolutionary terms when at least 5 different human species were alive on Earth at the same time. 5 different branches of the same family tree, walking around simultaneously, sometimes overlapping in territory, sometimes interbreeding, sometimes competing for the same resources. And then, over roughly the last 40,000 years, all of them disappeared. Except us. We don't fully know why. It probably wasn't one single cause. Climate shifts hit smaller, more isolated populations harder. Competition for food and territory likely played a role. Disease might have spread between species during contact. And in cases like the Neanderthals and Denisovans, a lot of what looks like disappearance was actually slow absorption. Their populations shrinking, interbreeding with modern humans, their distinct identity fading out even as some of their genes carried forward. But whatever combination of reasons it was, the outcome is the same. We're the last human species standing. Not because we were destined to be the winners of evolution. Not because we were obviously smarter or stronger or more deserving. We survived through some mix of luck, adaptability, and timing that we still don't completely understand. It's a strange thing to sit with. Every one of us walking around today carries pieces of species that no longer exist, a percent or two of Neanderthal here, a trace of Denisovan there, like genetic fossils, still active, still doing things, tucked inside our own DNA. We like to think of ourselves as the obvious result of evolution, the finished product. But the truth is closer to this. We're just a branch that happened to survive, while a handful of equally real, equally human species quietly ran out of time. So what do we actually do with all this? I think the biggest shift isn't really about ancient bones or DNA percentages. It's about how we think of human in the first place. For a long time, the story was simple. There's us, and there was everything before us, working its way up toward us. One line, one destination. That's not what happened. What actually happened is messier, and honestly, a lot more interesting. Different species of humans lived, adapted, created meaning, buried their dead, made art, crossed paths with each other, and in some cases, had children together. Being human, it turns out, was never just one thing. It happened in multiple forms, in multiple places at the same time. And we're not separate from that story. We're a continuation of it. Every time scientists dig up another skeleton, another cave, another fragment of bone in a place nobody expected, the story shifts a little more. Which means the version of human history we have right now, the one I just walked you through, probably isn't the final version either. There's likely another discovery out there right now, waiting in a cave somewhere, ready to rewrite this all over again. If you want to know what your own DNA says, whether you're carrying pieces of Neanderthal or Denisovan or some ancient story you didn't even know you were part of, that's genuinely worth looking into. Let me know in the comments. Which one of these discoveries messed with your head the most? The hobbits on Flores? The Denisovan fingerbone? Neanderthals with cave art? Or the tiny-brained species carrying their dead through the dark? And if you want more of this, the discoveries that keep quietly rewriting everything we think we know about where we came from, hit subscribe. There's a lot more of this story still being dug up. I'm G, and I'll see you in the next one.